Hello and thank you for checking out my channel today. Making a short video again to talk about psychology topics, and I've got two book recommendations. And these are two just really interesting and fun books actually that I think two different branches related though, subfields of psychology that I think a lot of people just are naturally going to find interesting because as a man there's the male brain really thinks about two things most of the time, fighting and fucking, right? So I want to recommend this book, Mating Intelligence Unleashed, The Role of the Mind in Sex, Dating, and Love by two academics, Glenn Gare, PhD, and Scott Barry Kaufman, PhD. We'll talk about that in a moment. And also The Professor in the Cage, Why Men Fight and Why We Like to Watch. So, we'll talk about this one first. I love this book, Jonathan Gottschall. This was just a really cool book because I am a man that has always instinctually just been drawn to watching fighting. I'm a martial arts enthusiast. I love it. And since the early 90s, I've been watching UFC on VHS tapes. And I was never really into organized sports or sports ball or anything like that. But even when I was young, I did naturally understand or it resonated with me to watch fighting, boxing. I love the Rocky movies, Bloodsport, Bruce Lee, early UFC stuff, and then as I got older, I just stayed with the sport of MMA. And we've all, if you're a man, we all know the thrill of being out in public somewhere and just being in the right place at the right time to witness a spectacular fight go down between two guys. Sometimes at the gas station, or I've seen it happen at an intersection in Oakville, an affluent suburb, or so at the workplace. And it's really fascinating to watch because you realize the way that fighting is built into us as primates very instinctually. I was driving my car once and I drove up to a red light in an intersection in Oakville, and there were two cars parallel to each other. Two guys got out, and honestly, it looked like one guy was in his 50s and one guy was in his 40s. These were like older guys. One guy looked like a blue-collar guy, and the other guy had a more expensive car and had his wife in the car, and he looked like the older guy and the chubbier guy. And these two guys, I don't know what their problem had been. They obviously had gotten in some altercation. Somebody must probably cut someone off or something. These two guys squared up and at this red light and just duked it out, and the older guy got the better of the bigger guy, and he went down on the road, just right there in the center of the road, and then got up and brushed himself off, and they just sort of it was, I don't even know if they nodded or if there's just a mutual understanding, like there was a winner and loser, and they got back in their cars and drove off. And I witnessed the whole thing from my own vehicle, and I was like, wow, what did I just see? That was awesome, because and that guy must have felt like such a baller because he was 50 years old and he had his wife in the car. And he just schooled some dude. But the point was, it was so instinctual. And it talks about evolution again, and how as primates we naturally duel this way. And then there's an understanding when it's over, wolves will duel for dominance all the time. But there's a clear winner and loser. And it's like Fight Club. When one of the wolves shows a submission sign, which is actually making its throat vulnerable, the fight's just over. And I don't think that the wolves are meta-conscious enough to even know what's going on. It's just that those signs are built into them to understand when to stop. It's another reason why I worry about sadists, people that are sadistic, sadists, because I kind of like violence. I like organized violence, and this book does a good job of explaining why we evolved organized or ritualistic violence, even sports. It gets into all of that. It's really interesting, and I just resonated with this as a man. It's really, again, not getting political at all, but this would really go against a lot of what would I call it, propaganda that's too progressive, that really distorts a lot of human nature, without even getting conservative on things. This book just kind of really helps you appreciate why males are the way they are. Even I as a man hadn't really thought of a lot of this stuff until I read this when I was 30. So it's not necessarily self-evident, but it is really intuitive, especially for males, especially with the way we communicate with our eyes when we're getting ready to fight. And why I really like this, because Jonathan Gottschall is, I felt like a kindred spirit to him in a sense, even though he's older than me. What happened with him is he's an English professor. I have an English degree, but he couldn't get tenure, and he had a wife and two daughters at home, and he just felt like he'd been trapped in this really hyper feminine environment for too long, which academia is a pretty feminine environment, to be fair. And he needed, his life was unbalanced. He needed some outlet for masculinity. And then he would see this new MMA gym that opened up across the street, and all these younger guys just actually like a Fight Club, and he just was fuck it, like quit his job, even though he was like 40, and started researching this book. And as he was writing the book, he started training, like a gimmick for the book, training for an actual fight. For I think he trained for 1 or 2 years, and then he had like an MMA fight. And I'm not too old yet, but I would love to like train for a boxing match, because I've trained a lot, but the pandemic threw off a lot of things that were going on in my life, and I never actually got to compete in boxing, even though I'd been training for tournament for 2.5 years, and I love boxing. I would really love to do the same thing, like go through the process of a training camp and then fight, and work it into a book with research and everything about martial arts. I still might, but this book has already kind of done that. Well, there's a tradition of writers that do that anyway, but it's just really, really interesting because this combines martial arts stuff and fighting with evolutionary psychology, and so obviously I love it. So check this out, guys, because it'll give you some cool insights again on human nature. This other book, Mating Intelligence Unleashed. Here's the thing, some people recommend reading like dating advice books and stuff. Most of that shit is all bullshit. Manosphere advice is garbage. Pickup artists, like they know what they're doing to get a certain type of woman, but that's not the certain type of woman anybody, in my opinion, would even want. So it's mostly garbage. This is not a book written by like cheesy pickup artists or influencers or anything like that. It's written by 2 academics who did research into the subject of mating psychology, which is like a sub-branch, obviously, of evolutionary psychology. And the key takeaway I want people to understand about this is that at our level of evolution, human evolution is not being driven by natural selection, as the term is used in the fields of psychology. It's sexual selection. Like these are all forms of, like, we can play a semantic game. Like these are all forms of natural selection. But what that means is it's not just the physical environment just sort of literally shaping organisms. It's agency of females in our species selecting traits that are sexually desirable, that are shaping like our species. So this happens in other animals too, like peacocks, for example. The magnificent tails of male peacocks have been sexually selected for over time as a way to show fitness to females. It's not necessarily about any kind of physical practicality, and that's just a nuance that I want to share with people about evolution and human beings. Is that our at this stage of things, it's sexual selection is driving evolution, and it's mostly like in a proper civilization outside of rape. Obviously, the females have sex selection preference. So women should think about this a lot, because they're sort of different cultures around the world, different nations have been shaped by the female agency in selecting for different traits, whether it's intelligence over brawn, like muscle, or just selecting for the most attractive males at the expense of intelligence. These will have large scale effects, right? And I won't get into which countries are like from where, how it works, but there are no, and it's not even specifically like a race based. Like there's I can give you examples of 2 different countries within one racial group that are different nations that the women seem to be selecting for different types of things, and it is like shaping things differently, even within one racial group. So it's not about race necessarily. But also this, people often younger guys ask me for dating advice all the time, and I'm not in my 20s anymore, and things have shifted so much that like I don't know, it'd be like a boomer giving financial advice to millennials. It's not necessarily the same game anymore, but this is just interesting because it does talk about more about data and research and stuff, but like psychologically different strategies that men have. And there's an IQ, a form of intelligence that men have when it comes to like the mating game. Some guys are just clueless, and some guys just are all instinctual and just know what's up, right? That's these guys argue that's a form of intelligence in and of itself. But what I just find interesting is it talks about everything from like homosexuality to narcissism to all those things too. But I also think it talks a lot about art and like the evolution of art and how women sexually select artists. And it's a cliche, but we all know like women find sexy guitar players or like fit guitar players sexier than engineers, even though engineers will make a lot more than artists typically, have a much more practical skill. In that case, why is the artist more attractive, right? Like it answers riddles like that. And it shares all these perspectives kind of on, like it says, like why we are attracted to the kinds of people we are. And it has all these interesting insights on that. I know that we all think about that kind of stuff all the time. I find dating psychology, mating psychology just absolutely fascinating. So check out those 2 books, because this one's about 10 years old, so it's getting a bit dated, but I think it's still still has some relevant stuff. So thanks guys, and take care.